Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. Once more, we step into the land of bendable maths, crafting a pristine Banzuke for September that the committee will inevitably stomp on and make us feel things. But we don't do feelings, we do maths. So let's get the math party started and make us some rankings. Now, when I made the draft Banzuke after the Basho, I was like, damn, some of this is crazy, I don't know how they're gonna figure this out. After giving it further consideration, I think some of these decisions are more straightforward than they initially seem. Or, at the very least, they're gonna have to throw some curvier curveballs than I thought to get away from the more obvious choices. Anyway, here is all the math that's relevant for putting together a Banzuke. Now you might notice that we're going way down into Juryo. Reason is, as you can see up top, and if you're looking on mobile it might be kinda small, but we only have 38 out of 42 slots filled by people who mathematically calculate into this division. So we're gonna need to pull a bunch of people up from Juryo in order to get this finished. For those of you who don't quite know how the math works, and we have gotten a few questions about that recently, very quickly it works like this. Basically, if you have a record of 9 and 6, 9 minus 6 equals 3. So you will go up plus 3 ranks, just like Oho does here. Similarly, if you're 7 and 8, 7 minus 8 equals -1, so you will go down 1 rank, much like Shonen no Umi does here. This is just to make the initial lineup, this is just to get everybody in order. Obviously you can see there are tons of gaps in here, and a Banzuke does not have these gaps. We're gonna have to shuffle everyone around. But this is how we figure out who goes where in relation to each other, so we know who deserves a higher rank than this guy, who deserves a lower rank than that guy, things of that nature. As always, let's start at the top of the Banzuke. Terunofuji, the Yokozuna, the champion, he's not going anywhere, he is Yokozuna 1 East. Kotozakura and Hoshoryu, 10 wins for Koto, 9 wins for Hoshoryu, mainly because of his injury, it looked like he was going to do better than that. In any case, Koto, Hoshoryu, Ozeki, they go in the order of the wins they had, so basically they're staying in position. Now here I have Onosato at 9 wins ahead of Abi at 8 wins. So for a long time, those of you who watch these videos regularly know this, but if you're new to this, for a long time, about 10 years really, they never moved guys within the ranks. So you can see Abi was a Sekiwake, he was on the east side, Onosato was on the west side. Just because Onosato had a better record, they would still leave him on west and Abi on east. They're both Sekiwake, there was really no reason to move them. The only time that they ever switched the two during that about 10-year period was when, I think it was Mataki Yumi, he had 13 wins, and the guy on the east side had 8. So that was a huge gap between those two, and then they flip-flopped them. But something like this, where there was only a 1-win difference, for a long time they would just leave them where they were. But the last time they were able to make a choice like this, they bumped the guy on the east side down. And in fact, in that case, there was somebody at Sekiwake 2 East, where Kirishima is now, that was Kotonowaka. He got bumped up, and I think it was Daisho got bumped over. There was only like a 2-win difference there. So there's no guarantee that they're gonna make this change. This is mostly a vibes pick. I have a feeling that this is what they're gonna do. They don't have to do it, they may not do it, there's not a specific reason for them to do it, except that they want to. And I think in this case they will. Similarly, Hiroto-Umi, with his 10 wins, I am calling ahead of Daisho, who was at east, to Hiroto-Umi's west. I'm saying Hiroto-Umi moves ahead. Other than that though, everyone basically stays in the same spot. The only real movement here is Takakeisho. Unfortunately, he was Kadoban and then only got 5 wins, so he's going to drop to Sekiwake. If an Ozeki is demoted, he goes to Sekiwake and he goes to the back of the line. They don't have to put him at the back of the line, it's not a requirement, but that's what they've done for a long time. There's no reason for them not to do it here. So I expect Takakeisho to end up at Sekiwake 2 West. Now what about Takano Sho? 12 wins. Now the arrow, if you use the Guess the Banzuke helper, there's a link in the description, it will do the math for you. However, if you have somebody go between sections, so from the Maegashira ranks to the Sanyaku, or vice versa, from Juryo to Makuuchi, or vice versa. It doesn't do the math, it just does this arrow, so you have to figure the rest out yourself. Takanosho was 12 and 3, which is plus 9. Well, he was Maegashira 6 East, and I've only bumped him up here to Komusubi. Why? He should be way up higher. Well, it's easier to read, but more to the point, even though he had this excellent record, he is going to be considered below everyone who was in the Sanyaku. Now, the question some people might have is, but is he going to become part of the Sanyaku? Is he going to be promoted to Komusubi? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. Do I think he deserves it with the kind of performance he had? I mean, arguably, but there only has to be 2 Sekiwake and 2 Komusubi. Anything beyond that comes when a slot gets open for a guy for a specific reason. For Maegashira 6, even a 12 and 3 record isn't going to be enough to open that 3rd Komusubi slot. So Takanosho is going to get moved down to Maegashira 1 East, and Tobizaru is going to get bumped over to Maegashira 1 West. There's really not much question that this is going to happen. Even though I left out everybody below this, these guys are far and away above anyone near them. The closest guys mathematically are Atami Fuji and Mitake Yumi, who both had losing records, so they're going to go down or stay in place at best. We'll talk about that in a second. If Takanosho went up here and Tobizaru came over here, then they're just going to have another spot to fill, and that's going to be a pain in the ass. There's no good reason to do it, so they're just going to move Takanosho to Maegashira 1 East, Tobizaru to 1 West. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to move on. Here's the next section. As you can see, we've got Takanosho and Tobizaru, and now we got to figure out what to do with everyone else. Well, Atami Fuji is a full rank ahead of Mitake Yumi and Oho. He was Maegashira 1 West. With his 7 and 8 record, he cannot go up, but if he goes over to Maegashira 2 East, that's going to be a half-rank demotion. That'll be fine. That's totally normal. We can do that. Now, the question becomes, what do we do here and here? How do we break these ties? Now, with Mitake Yumi and Oho, I was kind of like, well, they'll probably leave Mitake Yumi in front, but since they bumped Atami Fuji down a half rank, maybe they'll move Mitake Yumi down a half rank as well. But now I'm strongly leaning towards Mitake Yumi being in front, so going to 2 West and not losing any rank at all, and Oho moving over to 3 East. And the reason for that really revolves around Wakamoto Haru and Shodai. In this position, when you've got Mitake Yumi and Oho going to 2 West and 3 East, then these guys, we got to figure out, they're going to be at Maegashira 3 West and Maegashira 4 East. Who goes where? Well, Wakamoto Haru was in the Joy, the top 16 wrestlers, and Shodai was all the way down at Maegashira 10. He's gonna get over promoted anyway. This +5, that's his expected movement. If he's promoted beyond that, that means he's getting over promoted. I do not think they're going to over promote Shodai even ahead of Wakamoto Haru. That seems very unlikely. So if they're going to keep Wakamoto Haru in front of Shodai, so Waka to 3 West and Shodai to 4 East, it would look very strange for them to then put Oho ahead of Mitake Yumi. They could still do it. These are separate choices. It doesn't necessarily go because they did one way, they'll do the other the same way. That doesn't always happen. But what does tend to happen is that for any particular Banzuke, if they're viewing certain situations a certain way, they will tend to have that same view for most or all similar situations. So in this case, I think the guys with the losing records are going to be ranked higher, the guys with the winning records will be bumped a half rank behind them, and that leaves us with this. As you can see, Mitake Yumi, he did not get demoted at all. That is not that unusual for a 7 and 8 record. Oho, his +3 is now a 3.5. Shodai's +5 is now a +6. Wakamoto Haru gets a little bit lucky. The 3 rank demotion he should expect with the 6-9 record, he only goes down 1.5 ranks. This puts him in a good position to return to the Sanyaku with a very strong performance in September if his foot is okay. Next section, we've got Shodai here. Kota Shoho, there's no tie, he's ahead of everyone else. He can get bumped up to Maegashira 4 West. Now Shonen no Umi, he had a losing record, he was 7 and 8. And at 5 West, that means he can only go back to 5 West. That makes it pretty easy to place Wakataka Kage at Maegashira 5 East. Now, is it possible they'll bump Ura up here instead since Wakataka Kage is already getting over promoted? Again, they're allowed to, but this is really not gonna happen. That would give Ura only a half rank demotion on a 6 and 9 record, and that's something they only do if there's absolutely no choice. It's not going to happen. Waka's going to go to Maegashira 7 East. Or Maegashira 5 East, my bad. So now we do have the question, what's going to happen between Ura and Chura? Well, Ura was just outside of the Joy, so that doesn't necessarily mean he'll be treated special. So if you hang out with around these conversations for long enough, you might start hearing the term Joy preference. I use it sometimes. It means the committee will show a preference for the guys in the top 16 of the Banzuke because they have the hardest schedules. Now, they've kind of gotten away from that a little bit. They've definitely continued to show some preference for the guys in the Sanyaku, but the guys in the Joy, the bottom of the Joy, like the Maegashira ranks, maybe not so much. In any case, it's arguable whether they would consider Ura part of that group anyway. At 4 West, he was number 17, but with Takayasu's absence, he ended up fighting a lot of guys in the Sanyaku. In the end, though, I'm not sure it matters that much. If you put Ura over at Maegashira 6 East, like with Wakamoto Haru, he still gets a 1.5 rank decrease. On 6 and 9, that's fine. And Chura no Umi, if he goes to 6 West, that's +6 on a 10 and 5 record. That's an over promotion. From pretty far down in the Maegashira ranks, that's a pretty good jump. They could flip-flop them. This one I am not 100% on. I'm probably like 70-30, but it is more likely that they're going to put Ura ahead of Chura. And there we go. Everything is set through Maegashira 7. Now we have a couple more ties to deal with, and this one gets a little more complicated. Endo and Midori Fuji both had winning records and both were relatively low in the division. Who's going to get pushed ahead of the other? And this is where the committee has not been consistent over the last couple of years. For example, back in January 2023, Aoyama was Maegashira 10 East and was 8 and 7. Ichiyamamoto was Maegashira 14 East and was 10 and 5. That would put both of them at Maegashira 9 East. Mathematically, the final decision was to put Ichi with his 10 and 5 record at Maegashira 8 East, so he got over promoted. Aoyama ended up at Maegashira 9 East, so he got exactly the promotion he was supposed to get. Advantage to the better record. 1 year later, in 2024, we had Meisei at Maegashira 9 West with a 9 and 6 record, and then we had Oho at Maegashira 11 West with a 10 and 5 record. They were both calculating to Maegashira 6 West. As it turned out, Meisei, this was one where guys got over promoted like crazy. Meisei ended up at Maegashira 2 West and Oho at Maegashira 3 East. So in this case, advantage to the guy with the higher rank over the one with the better record. In March, we had a similar situation. Hiraumi was at Maegashira 4 West, which again, arguably in the Joy, but it kind of depends on circumstances. He was 9 and 6. Gonoyama was Maegashira 6 West, and he was 10 and 5. And then we had Takayasu, who was Maegashira 8 West and finished 11 and 4. All of them calculated to Maegashira 1 West. Now in this case, things got a little constricted up at the top, so they got slightly under promoted. Hiraumi ended up at Maegashira 2 East, Gonoyama at Maegashira 2 West, and Takayasu at Maegashira 3 East. So again, the better rank to start with got the advantage over the better records, but because these guys were getting to the top of the Banzuke, maybe that had an effect. Hard to say. Then you look at May, where we had Takano Sho with a 8 and 7 record at Maegashira 8 East, and Shonen no Umi, Maegashira 10 East, was 9 and 6. Both of them calculate to Maegashira 7 East. And who got the advantage there? Shonen no Umi. He got bumped up to Maegashira 5 West in Nagoya, while Takano Sho went to Maegashira 6 East. Advantage in this case went to the better record, although Takano Sho still turned out pretty okay with the whole deal. From these examples and others, I am going to go with a general theory that if you've got 2 winning records and one of the guys is 8 and 7, he's going to get bumped behind the one with the better record. So that would put Endo at Maegashira 8 East and Midori Fuji at Maegashira 8 West. Now that being said, we have our other tie. It also includes an 8 and 7 record, but it's an 8 and 7 versus a 7 and 8. And that is more likely to go in the favor of the 8 and 7 wrestler, especially because if Oshoma gets the advantage there, he goes to Maegashira 9 East, so he's not demoted at all. And they have definitely wanted to demote guys when possible in general. Not every time, but in general. So in this case, this is another one that strikes me as a 70-30. I think we've got Ichi Yamamoto, who's going to go to Maegashira 9 East, and Oshoma is going to go to 9 West. That leaves Tamawashi with his 7 and 8 and 9 West bumping over to 10 East, so he'll get a half-rank demotion, and that leaves us with this. Still, pretty much all beneficial movement. Under demotion, over promotion, over promotion, over promotion, slight under demotion, slight under demotion. So let's move on. Not much here because the interesting stuff comes right after this. In this case, you've got a guy with a better than 8 and 7 record against a guy with a losing record. Again, this is sort of a mood thing for the committee. In this case, I think they're probably gonna put Roga ahead at Maegashira 10 West, just because Sada no Umi is getting under demoted, and going to 11 East, that's a 3.5 rank decrease. That's not really a big deal, but this is one I think this is very 50-50. If you think Sada no Umi is going to end up at 10 West and Roga at 11 East, that's totally reasonable. This is the first pick so far where, like I said before, there's a couple of 70-30s. This is the first one that to me is more of a pure guess. This is a coin flip. I fully expect them to go in these two spots, but if you're playing Guess the Banzuke, you really want to get the rank right, the number right, and since they're going to end up at different numbers, this is something of a crucial decision. Unfortunately, I don't have any really solid reason to think they'll definitely go one way than the other. I just think Roga's going to end up at 10 West. I could very easily be wrong though. Kagayaki will then slot in behind them at Maegashira 11 West, and boom, we have Maegashira 10 and 11. Now we get to the fun stuff. First of all, we've got two Juryo promotees towards the top of this group, Onokatsu and Shirokuma. There's essentially no way in hell that they're going to promote Onokatsu ahead of Kinbozan and Bushozan. They've been friendlier to Juryo promotees when it comes to putting them ahead of guys in Makuuchi who have poor records, but Kinbozan, yeah, he did really badly, but he was way up the Banzuke, and Bushozan won. So really the question is, do we go with Bushozan or do we go with Kinbozan? Again, this is more of a 50-50. I don't think the 8 and 7 thing necessarily matters that much when you're talking about a tie with a guy that has a losing record. It might. They could put Sada no Umi behind Roga, but put Bushozan behind Kinbozan. In this case, I'm thinking they're going to put Bushozan ahead. I could, again, be wrong. This is another 50-50, but at least, they're almost certain to go to Maegashira 12, so you're at least basically guaranteed to get the rank right, even if you get the side wrong. Now, what do we do here? Well, it is very possible for the committee to decide that guys who were in Makuuchi, even if they had losing records, should end up ahead of guys who are coming up from Juryo, especially someone like Shirokuma, who was a little more than halfway down the division. However, I don't think they're going to do that this time, and it mostly revolves around Hokuto Fuji. The order of these guys, if you take out Onokatsu and Shirokuma, the order of these guys should be Hokuto Fuji, Nishikigi, Ryuden. If you put them ahead of the two guys coming up from Juryo, that means Hokuto Fuji goes to Maegashira 13 East, where he just was. But with a 6 and 9 record, he has to get demoted something, at least a half a rank. So this setup isn't gonna work. For that reason, the most likely possibility is that they're going to just leave these guys in rank order. Everybody bumps up 2 ranks from where the math says they should go. Onokatsu, Shirokuma, Hokuto Fuji still only goes down 1 rank on 6 and 9, Nishikigi -3 on 5 and 10, kinda nice for him, and then Ryuden, well, there's a little bit of kindness, I guess we'll live with it. I do want to show you some alternatives. These are goofy, but these are things that would have happened in the past. If this happened a couple years ago, I would probably go with one of these alternatives. The main one is Ryuden getting bumped ahead of everybody else. This is because at 3 and 12, there used to be a certain level of generosity, kindness, call it what you will, for guys who either were Kyujo or did really, really, really poorly. Think about it like this. If you get to this level, if you go 3 and 12, something has to be wrong. It's very rare that you get somebody who absolutely cannot compete. Like, if you can't compete here, how did you even get to this point? So you would sometimes see kind demotions, like serious under demotions, even if it bumped them a little ahead of other guys that they should be behind when somebody really, really, really struggled. Even so, I don't know if they would under-demote a guy at 3 and 12 by an extra 2 ranks when there's a guy who's 5 and 10, which isn't that much better, not that far from him. But what they could end up doing is this. In this case, you've got Hokuto Fuji, he's got his half rank decrease, and then you've got Nishikigi still ahead of Ryuden. The point of this being that they're still ahead of Onokatsu and Shirokuma. This would be done for no reason, other than to make sure the guys who were in Maegashira and still mathematically calculated in Maegashira, make sure they stay ahead of the guys who were in Juryo. It's not a very good reason, but it was something that wasn't impossible. In fact, they could even bump Ryuden ahead of Hokuto Fuji, so even though Hokuto Fuji should be ahead of these guys, so even though it should have been 1, 2, 3, to make sure Hokuto Fuji gets a 1 rank decrease, they'll bump him down an extra rank. Now, Nishikigi, with a worse record, with a 5 and 10 record, is only going down 1.5 ranks in this case, which is just terrible. I really doubt that they would do this, but they're allowed to. Goofy things happened when they really wanted to make sure guys from Juryo didn't come up that far, or for any other point they were trying to make. And maybe the most realistic version of these oddball setups would be putting Ryuden at the top. So even though it should be 1, 2, and 3, you just flip that order because Ryuden has the most space in which to be demoted. By which I mean, if you think of the range of acceptable landing spots as increasing the more severe a guy's record is, -5 on 3 and 12 is actually pretty doable. That's happened quite a lot in the past. -2 on 5 and 10, it's small, but it's happened. -1 on 6 and 9, again, that's small, but it's happened. This would be a setup that would allow the committee to place them within acceptable demotion ranges, even though this is not the order they should end up in. However, the committee has gained more sense over time, and they've also been just not that nice to guys with terrible records or who were Kyujo. We'll talk about a couple of them shortly. Plus, Maegashira 13 is not that high for guys coming up from Juryo, so I think this is acceptable. Just bear in mind that something weird could happen, so I think this is the most likely outcome. This is going to be my guess, but I bring up the other options because the fact that these guys are coming up from Juryo and will be further over promoted to end up in these spots could lead to something goofy happening if the committee decides that they need to find a way to make sure they're not promoted this far. I don't think that'll happen, but it's not impossible. So now we're good through Maegashira 15 East, which leaves us 4 more slots. And if you'll recall, those are the guys we need to pull up who calculated into Juryo. So let's take a look at that. This is a lot of guys to think about when we're only looking at 4 spots. Now, some of them are definitely not coming up, but I wanted to be thorough. So for Maegashira 15 West and 16 East, the options are pretty obvious. Takayasu and Takara Fuji. Number 1, Takayasu is ahead of everybody else, so going to 15 West is just obvious. Takara Fuji is tied with 2 other guys, but they were both in Juryo. He was in Maegashira, so he's just gonna land at 16 East. That'll give him a 2.5 rank drop on 5 and 10, which is perfectly acceptable. And now, how do we fill the other 2 slots? Well, let's get rid of the guys who can't make it. Toki Hayate had a losing record in Juryo. He's not coming up. There are 2 guys from Juryo, Kitanawaka and Shishi, who are ahead of this other guy from Juryo, Tamashoho. He only landed here because he was tied with these other guys, so he's not gonna come up either. He's out. Asanoyama is behind everybody else, so despite the fact that he suffered this terrible injury that's not going to save him, he's going to be down too. And Nishiki Fuji, 6 and 9 doesn't have to drop far, but he was at the absolute bottom rank in the division. He has to be demoted to some degree, so he's out too. This leaves us with Kitanawaka, Shishi, Onosho, and Chiyoshoma. Now, if you just go by the math, it's Kitanawaka and Shishi. However, there is absolutely a certain preference given to guys who were in Maegashira over the guys who were in Juryo, and that extends down here. Onosho and Chiyoshoma are only 1/2 rank behind Shishi. I do not think there's any world in which Shishi gets promoted over those 2. He did really well, but he was also Juryo 10. The fact that he was that far down in Juryo, further than Shirokuma, which I had questions about earlier, just makes it that much less likely they're going to push him all the way into Makuuchi without being absolutely forced to do so. It is not impossible that he gets there, but I think we're talking like a 5% chance. It's very, very, very unlikely, and he's not going to be one of my picks. So let's look at these other 3. Even if you think that Kitanawaka is going to be promoted just because Onosho and Chiyoshoma have dropped too far and somebody who's a rank and a half ahead of them is going to be promoted first, one of them does have to stay. If we don't put Shishi up there, one of them does have to stay. And since Chiyoshoma, if you drop him to 17 East, that's only -2 with 5 wins, which should be a drop of 5 ranks, I think that's going to end up going to Onosho. He was 5 East, he got hurt. Falling 11.5, 12 ranks is still an enormous demotion. He's the obvious pick to stay, so we're just going to draw the arrow up here. We'll talk about where they're going to go later. So now is it going to be Kitanawaka or Chiyoshoma? Now, for the draft, I said Chiyoshoma. I said that specifically because I thought, well, they're not going to put Kitanawaka up there because he didn't earn his way into the division, and Chiyoshoma, like, dropping 2 ranks on 5 wins, it's a small demotion, but they'll do it. I think that's reasonable enough that they'll do it. After some conversations, I have changed my mind. That actually seems kind of goofy. Kitanawaka, I believe, is far enough ahead, as others before me said, as they convinced me to believe. I think he's far enough ahead of Chiyoshoma that he's going to get that last spot. Now, that being said, even though he's a rank and a half ahead of Onosho, I don't think they're going to put him ahead of Onosho. I think Onosho gets curved into 16 West, and Kitanawaka, because he's getting lucky being a Juryo guy who did not calculate out of Juryo, but is still getting promoted to Makuuchi anyway, they're gonna just drop him in the last slot. Now, I don't think that's a guarantee. I still think there's a possibility that they put Chiyoshoma up there instead. But this is one where I'm thinking it's more like 80% versus 20%, you know? It's a situation where Kitanawaka may not have done enough to earn the spot, but Chiyoshoma did enough to lose it. Kitanawaka is just a lucky beneficiary. Although, considering how his last stint in Makuuchi went, I don't know if he's gonna feel all that lucky outside of the paycheck. Now, all that being said, there is one other possibility that I don't want to ignore. If they think that Onokatsu or Shirokuma, both at 13, would be too high, or if they think that Hokuto Fuji and Nishikigi and Ryuden need more of a demotion, or both, they could move Takayasu to Maegashira 13 East. Now, they have not been this nice to Kyujo guys recently. Last couple of years, if you're Kyujo, you just take the hit. You go wherever it looks like you should go, and maybe they'll move you up a little bit, a rank or so, from where it looks like you're gonna land if there's an obvious gap to fill. In this case, he would be going from 15 West, the landing spot we're predicting, to 13 East, 2.5 ranks. That's much more kindness than these guys have been shown of late. But if there was ever a situation to do this, this might be it. I do not think this is impossible. I do not think it's likely, but like I was saying, a couple years ago, they were definitely nicer to guys who were Kyujo, who had really poor records. If it was then, I would definitely make this prediction. Now, I'm not doing it, but I think that's gotta be in the back of their minds a little bit, the possibility of doing this. In fact, if they wanted to get really spicy, they could not only put Takayasu at 13, but Onosho as well. I think this is extremely unlikely because Takayasu calculated 3 ranks ahead of Onosho. The only way this happens is if they are hell-bent on pushing everyone from Onokatsu to Ryuden down a full rank. And to be honest, that just seems a little excessive. There's no reason Onosho can't be dropped into 16 West and everything is fine. In fact, they could just move Onokatsu to 13 West, Shirokuma to 14 East, but then Onosho to 14 West so that the guys with the losing records get bumped down further. But again, they calculated way ahead of Onosho, so I don't think that's going to happen. The only one that might benefit from this, I think, is Takayasu. That's not the prediction I'm making, but if you think that this is going to happen, I don't think you're crazy, and if you go for it on your guess, hey, bless your heart, I wish you all the best. Whew, that's our Banzuke for Aki 2024. As always, throw your ideas in the comments, especially anything you disagree with. If you're new to Banzuke creation, hopefully you picked up some useful knowledge, but if there's anything else you'd like to know, absolutely leave a comment. I answer questions as much as I can. Finally, a couple weeks ago, I mentioned we were putting together something special or interesting, I forget what word I used. It's almost done. Short version, it's about the last basho in Nagoya, but designed as something of a tribute to a YouTuber whose work I like quite a bit. Turns out, even though he puts out videos like this in a few days, it took me 2.5 weeks and I'm just doing it this once. Hopefully everyone will enjoy it though. So keep an eye out for that, get your Banzuke entry in, all relevant links in the description, and other than that, have a great day. I'll see you soon.